The Road to War. Written and narrated by John Miro. Get more at servingworlds.com. 15. Noelle couldn't tear her eyes from the sky even to blink, despite the pain in her rapidly drying eyes. Rivers of violets, blues, and greens rushed past above, dancing and curling around each other like living, dancing spirits, impossibly bright, magical things. She wondered if she hadn't gotten ox in time, or if the impact foam hadn't been enough to protect the pudding between her ears. She shook her head feebly a few times, trying to get thoughts flowing, but the wonder above her defied her understanding, until the repetitive thumping sound her ears were ignoring vibrated up through her feet. She whirled her head over her right shoulder. In a small window between the nightmare crystale above her and the roof of the next building over, she saw smoke and the reflected bloom of explosions. The Reachers were invading. She understood then what was firing up the skies. Charged protons and electrons colliding with atoms and gases in Reach's atmosphere. The convoy had arrived. She wedged her eyes shut against a world mad with color. Time to execute, girl. She had no comms and no troops in sight. Somehow, she had to get to the front and help hold the row. A single mournful scream ripped through the thin air, dragging Noelle's eyes to the corner of the building ahead of her. The scream came from the other side of it. She saw red. Not in the sky, but in her mind. The commander's blood dripping down the wall. Noelle ran towards the scream. At the very moment Jake rocketed over the hill, the sky erupted in vivid, rippling colors. PFC Bowen and he had jumped from the top of the crystal barrier, burning a quarter of each mech's fuel supply to rocket them up to the 4th floor. Not one of the spiky crystal gun placements grown on the side of the towers fired a shot before Grunt and Bone exhausted the missile pods on their shoulders. Grunt took the tower to the left of the weapons platform they'd hit earlier, Bone the one on the right. Entire floors disappeared behind explosions. Room-sized chunks were vaporized. A lethal hail of stone and crystal shards blasted outwards half a click in every direction, but by then the two mechs were falling between the towers, insulated from the barrage they'd unleashed. Commitment to action also insulated the two soldiers from the paralysis gripping the Earthers below, who stared up, frozen at the flood of color. Firing systems didn't get surprised, however, and 5 defensive batteries targeted the returning Reachers for a warm welcome. Jake had always planned a return trip into the row, and had instructed his team to scatter dozens of chiggers between the towers during the first run. Chiggers were fist-sized drones, each carrying 9 finger-sized missiles. The small drones crawled into any hole and crevice they could find. They burrowed beneath sand or squeezed themselves into shadowy corners. On any other day, it would have been a horrendous waste of munitions due to Earth's vastly superior scan and detect capabilities. On this day, with the row's satellites hijacked and network scrambled, the chiggers remained undetected. The weapon platform had gone back online, its operators none the wiser to the multiple threats hidden only feet away. A simple thought, captured by Jake's interface crown, activated them all at once. In an instant, 10 dozen chiggers sprang into the clear and fired over 1,000 missiles. Some of the missiles took lives. Some destroyed the heavy weapons readying to fire. Some detonated inside crates filled with munitions, igniting a bloom of heat and pressure that slammed Grunt and Bone through the walls of the 2 towers and several rooms deep. Jake was still laughing and pumping his mech's gigantic fist when he tumbled to a stop deep inside the building. Lee grit his teeth and pushed against the muzzle of the rifle, groaning in pain and growing frustration. The escape hatch didn't budge. The stock of the unloaded rifle started to bend. He dragged the gun's barrel out of the emergency hatch and smashed it against the dead machinery lining the cockpit. He could hear explosions and buildings tumbling apart. He could feel the ground quake as the sustained bombardment continued. Ethereal light drifted through the half-open escape hatch, green, then blue, then green again. Operation Sinkhole had begun, just as the Fold convoy had arrived, carrying reinforcements from Earth. A virtual horse race with the future of the planet going to the victors. And Lee was stuck in a powered-down tin can in Gov's backyard. As Lee watched, the middle tower to the east collapsed. The ground didn't stop rumbling in between explosions anymore, and the weirdly colored sky was growing darker under a cloud of smoke. In the distance, he saw gunships streaking closer to the row. He wondered if he'd be captured and killed by Earthers or turned into paste by a Reacher bomb first. Lee decided he'd rather rip his lungs out on the escape hatch than sit around and find out. He wedged himself into the hatch and pushed. His boots found perch on the side of the cockpit and pushed again. The door wouldn't give another inch. Lee knew his body would, and he made that happen. Lee lost himself in a haze after he broke his first rib. The animal inside wanted to survive and kept pushing and pushing and pushing until he was through. The ground rose up and punched him in the side of the head. Hot knives stabbed his left side, and he gasped in pain, rolling onto his back. The pain brought a fresh wave of adrenaline, and Lee's palms and ankles kicked at the ground, inchworming his punished body under the shadow of the statue that had caged him. There he panted, unable to move any further. He stared up at the surreal, changing sky. His ears rang, his body vibrated in a way that had nothing to do with the death and destruction tearing into the row. Somehow his nasal prongs had stayed in place. He spun the tank at his waist wide open and sucked pure air. Trembling hands dragged his pack closer, fumbled for drugs to kill the pain every shallow breath reignited. The drugs and the air helped a little. The searing agony wasn't gone all the way, but he could see past it, think past it. He reached back into the pack, searching for another piece of equipment, one every bit as precious as the drugs. The distinct metallic sound of a slide chambering around interrupted his search. Lee looked up. An angry woman with brown skin, shaved scalp, and a bloody Earther's officer's uniform was closing the distance. Both hands white-knuckling, a pistol pointed straight at his head. You have been listening to Reach, The Road to War. Written and narrated by John Miro. Music, All This by Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com. Hear more of the story at servingworlds.com. Thank you for listening.